Derby County Football Club is a professional association football club based in Derby, Derbyshire, England. The home matches are played at Pride Park Stadium, where the club moved to in 1997. Notable for being one of the 12 founder members of the Football League in 1888, it is one of only 10 clubs to have competed in every season of the English Football League system and, in 2009, was ranked 137th in the top 200 European football teams of the 20th century by International Federation of Football History and Statistics. Derby County F.C. was founded in 1884 by William Morley. As an offshoot of Derbyshire County Cricket Club, it has spent all but 4 seasons in the top 2 divisions of English football. The club's competitive peak came in the 1970s when they were twice English League champions and competed in major European competitions on 4 separate occasions, reaching the European Cup semi-finals, as well as winning several minor trophies. Additionally, the club was a strong force in the interwar years and won the 1945-46 FA Cup. The club adopted its now traditional black and white club colours in the 1890s and appropriated its club nickname the Rams, a tribute to its links with the 1st Regiment of Derby Militia, which took a ram as its mascot, and the song "The Derby Ram" as its regimental song. At the same time, history. Beginning an early success, Derby County F.C. was formed in 1884 as an offshoot of Derbyshire County Cricket Club in an attempt to give players and supporters a winter interest as well as secure the cricket club extra revenue. The original intention was to name the club Derbyshire County F.C. to highlight the link, though the Derbyshire FA, formed in 1883, objected on the grounds it was too long and therefore would not have been understood by the fans, who may mistake it for a Derbyshire FA team. Playing the home matches at the cricket club's racecourse ground 1884-85 saw the club undertake an extensive programme of friendly matches, the first of which was a 6-0 defeat to Great Lever on 13 September 1884. The club's first competitive match came in the 1885 FA Cup, where they lost 7-0 at home to Walsall Town. Arguably the most important game in the club's history came in the following season's FA Cup, when a 2-0 victory over Aston Villa, already an emerging force in English football, helped establish Derby County F.C. on the English football map, helping the club to attract better opposition for friendlies and, in 1888, an invitation into the inaugural Football League. The opening day of the first ever league season was the 8th of September 1888, when Derby came from 3-0 down away to Bolton Wanderers to win 6-3, though the club ultimately finished 10th out of 12 teams. They absorbed another Derby club, Derby Midland.Their, who had been members of the Midland League in 1891, leaving them as Derby's sole professional football club. Steve Bloomer, generally considered to be Derby County's best ever player, joined the club in 1892. In 1895 the club moved to a new stadium, the baseball ground, which became the home for the next 102 years and adopted the traditional colours of black and white. Although Derby were inconsistent in the league, they did finish runners-up to Aston Villa in 1896, as well as achieving a number of third-place finishes. They were a strong force in the FA Cup, appearing in 3 finals in 6 years around the turn of the 20th century, though lost all 3 in 1898, 1899 and 1903.
Edwardian and interwar era. In 1906, Steve Bloomer was sold to Middlesbrough due to financial constraints, and Derby subsequently suffered its first ever relegation the following season. But under Jimmy Methven's management they re-signed Steve Bloomer and regained the First Division place in 1911. In 1914, they were relegated again, but instantly won the Second Division to get promoted. After 2 seasons, they were relegated yet again in 1921. However, the appointment of George Joby in 1925 kick-started a successful period for the Rams, and, after promotion in 1926, the club became a formidable force, with high finishes from the late 1920s and all through the 1930s. Including finishing runners-up twice. Derby were one of several clubs to close down after the outbreak of World War II but restarted in the early 1940s, in part due to the persistence of Jack Nicholas and Jack Webb, aided by the recruitment of Ry Carter and Peter Doherty, who had both been stationed in Loughborough during the war. Derby were one step ahead of the opposition when competitive football resumed with the 1946 FA Cup and won the first major trophy with a 4-1 victory over Charlton Athletic. Post-war success and decline. The league restarted the following season after a break due to the Second World War and under the management of Stuart McMillan, as well as twice breaking the British transfer record to sign Billy Steele and Johnny Morris to replace Carter and Doherty. Finished 4th and 3rd in the 1948 and 1949 seasons respectively, before a steady decline set in and the club was relegated in 1953, after nearly 30 years in the top flight, and again in 1955 to drop to the third tier of English football for the first time in the history. Harry Storer led Derby back into the second tier at the second attempt in 1957, though the club progressed no further over the next decade under either Storer or his successor, former Derby player Tim Ward. Brian Clough era. In 1967, Brian Clough and Peter Taylor took over and led them to the greatest glory, having clinched the influential signing of Dave Mackay. Derby were promoted to the First Division in 1969, finished 4th in 1970, were banned from competing in Europe due to financial irregularities in 1971 and won the first ever Football League Championship in 1972. Though Derby did not retain the title the following season, they did reach the semi-finals of the European Cup. They lost to Juventus in a controversial match which was subject to subsequent allegations that the Italian club had bribed the match officials, leading Clough to call the Italians cheating bastards. Clough's frequent outspoken comments against football's establishment eventually led to him falling out with the board of directors at the club, and Clough and Taylor left in October 1973. Such was their impact on the club that, 37 years later, a 9-0 high bronze statue of the pair was erected outside Pride Park in commemoration of the legacy. Success and decline after Clough. Despite the departure of Clough and Taylor, Derby's league success was repeated in the 1974-75 season when they won the title under successor Dave Mackay, who had been a player under Clough when they had returned to the top flight in 1969. However, Derby's form declined towards the end of the 1970s and they went down to the Second Division in 1980 after a string of managers, including former Manchester United boss Tommy Docherty. unsettled the club, trying desperately to maintain its place at the top of the First Division. Though they challenged well in the first season, Derby were soon hit hard by rising debts, falling attendances and dismal performances. Peter Taylor returned to the baseball ground as manager in early 1983 and kept Derby up that season, but he retired a year later just before Derby's relegation to the Third Division for only the second time in the history. However, Derby did manage to avoid going out of business, and they were soon under the ownership of wealthy businessman Robert Maxwell. 1980s revival. After relegation to the Third Division in May 1984, the club appointed Arthur Cox as manager. Although they missed out on promotion in Cox's first season as manager, they then won back-to-back promotions and were back in the First Division for the 1987-88 season, with attendances also rising as the club's on-the-field fortunes and financial position improved. The financial backing of new chairman Robert Maxwell saw stars such as Peter Shilton, Mark Wright, Dean Saunders, Trevor Hubbard and Ted McMinn brought to the club, and they finished fifth in the 1988-89 season. However, English clubs were banned from European competition at the time following the Heysel Stadium disaster, and so the Rams missed out on a place in the UEFA Cup end of the century. A lack of any further investment from Maxwell quickly led to a decline, culminating in relegation back to the Second Division in 1991. At this time, local newspaper businessman Lionel Pickering became the majority shareholder of the club, taking control just before Maxwell's death in November 1991. In 1992, Derby County paid £2.5 million for Nottinghamshire County Central defender Craig Short. At the time, and for 5 years afterwards, the most expensive player to be signed by a club outside the top flight, and indeed one of the highest fees paid by any English club for a player at the time. Other expensive signings included strikers Tommy Johnson and Marco Gabbiadini. Cox's resignation as manager in October 1993 saw the appointment of legendary former player Roy McFarland as manager. Derby reached the final of the Division 1 playoffs that season, but were beaten by local rivals Leicester City. McFarland was sacked a year later after Derby missed out on the playoffs, and his replacement was Jim Smith, a manager whose track record at his previous clubs included 4 promotions and an FA Cup semi-final appearance. Although the 1995-96 season started slowly, the signing of sweeper Igor Stimac in the early autumn proved pivotal. Smith guided the Rams to a second-place finish in the Premier League, now the top flight of English football. During that season, it was announced that Derby would be leaving the baseball ground after more than 100 years to move into a new all-seater stadium, following earlier plans to develop the baseball ground as a 26,000-seat stadium. After finishing in 12th place in the first season back into the top flight, the club left the baseball ground, its home of 102 years, to move into the new 33,597-seat Pride Park Stadium for the 1997-98 season. The baseball ground was demolished 6 years later, and a memorial was eventually erected in memory of its role in Derby City history. 21st century. The club settled well into its new home as it recorded back-to-back top 10 finishes for the first time since the 1970s peak, before a sudden decline at the turn of the millennium saw 3 years of struggle. Smith resigned to be replaced by former players Colin Todd, who lasted just 3 months, and John Gregory before the Rams were relegated after a 6-year stay in the top flight in 2002. Derby County's
season's relegation saw the club enter a serious financial crisis, which forced them to sell many key players. Gregory was later suspended from his managerial duties over alleged misconduct, and former Ipswich Town boss George Burley was brought in. The club was put into receivership, then sold in October 2003 for £3 to a group led by Jeremy Keith. After finishing 20th in the 2003-04 season, a dramatic improvement in the 2004-05 season saw Derby finish 4th in the Football League Championship, qualifying for a promotion playoff spot, though they lost in the semi-finals to Preston North End. Soon afterwards, Burley resigned, citing differences between himself and the board. He was replaced by Bolton first-team coach Phil Brown. In January 2006, Brown was sacked after a poor run of results. Terry Westley, the academy coach at the time, took over first-team duties until the end of the season and saved Derby from relegation. In April 2006, a consortium of local businessmen led by former vice-chairman Peter Gadsby bought the club, reducing its debt and returning Pride Park Stadium to the club's ownership in the process. In June 2006, a former Preston North End boss, Billy Davies, was appointed Derby County's new permanent manager. In his first season, Davies took Derby to the Championship playoffs, where they beat Southampton on penalties in the semi-finals before defeating West Bromwich Albion 1-0 with the second-half Stephen Pearson goal at the new Wembley Stadium to secure a return to the Premier League and the associated £60 million windfall. In October 2007, Peter Gadsby stepped down as chairman to be replaced by former Hull City owner Adam Pearson, who immediately began searching for investment from overseas. After a poor start to the season, manager Billy Davies left by mutual consent in November. He was succeeded by Paul Jewell, who failed to save the club as Derby suffered the Premier League's earliest ever relegation in March, recorded the Premier League's lowest ever points total, and equalled Loughborough's 108-year Football League record of going through an entire season with only one win and have the status of being the worst football club in football history. In January, the club was taken over by an international investment group led by General Sports and Entertainment, with Pearson remaining as de facto chairman. Derby's match at home to Sheffield United on the 13th of September 2008 generated much media coverage as it was approaching a year since Derby's last league win, a run which saw the club break the English League record for most matches without a win, just 4 days short of the anniversary of the 1-0 victory over Newcastle. Rob Hull scored against his former club as Derby ran out 2-1 winners, earning Paul Jewell his first league win as Derby boss at his 27th attempt. Despite taking the club to the League Cup semi-final, the club's first major cup semi-final since 1976, where Derby lost 4-3 to Manchester United over 2 legs, Jewell resigned as manager in December 2008 after a run of just 2 wins in 11 matches. He was replaced by Nigel Clough, son of former manager Brian. He led the club to 18th place and safety. After 2 seasons that saw the club finish in the bottom half of the table, Derby finished the 2 subsequent seasons in 12th and 10th place. Clough was sacked 9 games into the 2013-14 season after defeat to local rivals Nottingham Forest, and was replaced by former Derby player and assistant manager Steve McLaren. Under McLaren, the club finished 3rd in the Championship and reached the final of the playoffs, after beating Brighton and Hove Albion 6-2 on aggregate in the semi-finals, although in the finals they lost 1-0 to Queen's Park Rangers in the 89th minute. McLaren also saw the Rams beat the record for most goals scored in one season
season. The 2014-15 season saw Derby competing at the top end of the championship for much of the season, even leading the table going into March. However, a slump in performances and a poor run of form towards the end of the season, in which Derby only picked up 2 wins in 13 matches, saw them slide down to 8th, not only missing out on automatic promotion, but the playoff positions as well. As a result of this, on the 25th of May 2015, Steve McLaren was sacked. Paul Clement was announced as McLaren's successor. On the 3rd of June 2015, local businessman Mel Morris was named as the new chairman of the club, replacing Andrew Appleby, who remained as a director. The 2015-16 season saw Derby again competing for promotion to the Premier League. They sacked the head coach, Paul Clement, after 8 months in charge, appointing academy director Darren Wassell as coach for the remainder of the season. They finished 5th in the league but lost to Hull in the playoff semi-final. Hull went on to win the playoff final and promotion. Former Leicester City boss Nigel Pearson was appointed head coach in May 2016. Club crest and colours. Crest. Like most old football clubs, Derby County did not initially have any badge displayed on the shirts. The first badge was introduced in 1924. The badge consisted of a circular shield split into 3 equally sized sections, representing the club, its fans and the area, all containing items traditionally associated with the city of Derby. A Tudor rose and a crown in one section, a buck in a park in the second, and a ram's head in the final section. The badge was worn on the players' shirts for just 2 seasons before they reverted to plain shirts. By 1934, another badge had been introduced. This time it was a traditionally shaped shield, again with 3 sections. The buck in the park had been removed and the rose and the crown had been split up and now occupied a section each. The ram's head also remained and was now given the largest section of the shield. The badge never appeared on the players' shirts. The shield was modified in 1946 when the rose and crown were removed and replaced with the letters DC and FC respectively. The badge right was featured onto the players' shirts from its introduction onwards, though the ram's head on its own was used from the late 1960s. A new club badge was introduced in 1971, featuring a more modern design that, with modifications, is still in use. The badge was initially consisted of a stylized white ram facing left. The badge was first modified slightly in 1979 to include the text Derby County F.C. under the ram. In 1982 the ram turned to face to the right and the text under it was removed. The ram was surrounded by a wreath of laurel and the text Centenary 1984-1985 was printed underneath for the club's centenary season. The laurel was removed and the text reading Derby County F.C. returned from the next season. In 1993, the ram faced left again and the text was removed once more. From 1995, the ram faced right and was enclosed in a diamond, with a gold banner reading Derby County F.C. underneath and the text 1884 underneath that. The design was changed again in 1997. The ram faced now left and the golden banner now simply read Derby County. The diamond and year of formation were removed. A decade later, in 2007, the badge was modified again with the ram still facing left and the text 1884 now in the middle of a circular frame featuring Derby County Football Club in gold lettering, with the colors being modified to the club colors of black black and white in 2009. In July 2012, the club announced intention to show only the iconic ram on future shirts, rather than the full club logo. In July 2013, this traditional ram became the club's full logo again. Colours. Derby County's original colours were amber, chocolate and blue, though by the 1890s the club had adopted its now traditional colours of black and white, which are still in use today. In the 1970s and 80s, colours for home matches were white shirts with small blue or red touches, blue shorts and socks that were blue, red, white or a combination of the three. The colours of away kits have varied widely, and although they're usually yellow, gold or blue, the colour for the away kit for the 2008-09 season was fluorescent green. The club also introduced a surprise third kit in August 2008. Similar in design to the club's away kit of the 1970s, with blue and white stripes and reminiscent of the Argentina strip. The style was reintroduced following feedback from fans who said it was one of the favorite kits from the club's past. Club mascot. Derby's mascot is a ram named Rammy. Rammy is a full-time employee of the club who also works to maintain the club's links with fans and the East Midlands in general, such as school visits to promote literacy and charity events. Rammy originally emerged as a more friendly option to the club's traditional links with the British Army. Rammy was the first full-time mascot in British football. Rammy's traditional activities include penalty shootouts with members of the crowd at half-time, with Rammy as goalkeeper, and warming the crowd up before the match and encouraging the Derby fans during matches. Rammy is a very popular figure amongst Rams fans and, in 2005, released his first DVD, which features the character reading from Aesop's fables in the Derbyshire countryside. Shortly thereafter, Rammy was joined by a female equivalent, named Avi. Avi did not last very long at Pride Park, however, and took a reported vacation to the United States. She returned from a 10-year exile on the 3rd of October 2015 at a home match against Brentford F.C. Stadium. As an offshoot of Derbyshire County Cricket Club, Derby County's first home stadium was County Cricket Ground, also known as the Racecourse Ground, where the club played its League and FA Cup matches between 1884 and 1895. Although the ground itself was good enough to hold the first FA Cup final match outside London, when Blackburn Rovers beat WBA 2-0 in the 1886 FA Cup final replay and a full England international. Disputes over fixture clashed between the football and cricket clubs meant that when the opportunity to play at Sir Francis Lee's baseball ground arose, the club accepted, commonly referred to amongst supporters as the BBG. The club moved to the baseball ground in 1895 and remained there for the next 102 years. Despite opportunities to move in the 1920s and 1940s, Derby had already played there, a 1-0 win over Sunderland during the 1891-92 season, as an alternate venue after a fixture clash at the county ground. At its peak during the late 1960s, the ground could hold around 42,000. The club's record attendance achieved following the opening of the Lay Stand with a 41,826 crowd watching a 5-0 defeat of Tottenham Hotspur on the 20th of September 1969. For this peak, the continued addition of seating saw the capacity drop over the next 15 years to 26,500 in 1985. Following the Taylor Report in 1989, and a legal requirement for all-seater stadia, the ground's capacity dwindled to just 18,500 by the mid-1990s, not enough for the then ambitious second-tier club. Despite initially hoping to rebuild the baseball ground to hold 26,000 spectators, and rejecting the offer of 2 sites elsewhere in Derby. Then Chairman Lionel Pickering announced in February 1996 the intention to move to a new, purpose-built stadium at the newly regenerated Pride Park, with the last ever first-team game at the baseball ground being in May 1997, a 1-3 home defeat to Arsenal, though it continued to host reserve games until 2003. Derby's new ground, named Pride Park Stadium, was officially opened by Queen Elizabeth II on the 18th of July, with a friendly against Sampdoria following on the 4th of August. Derby hold the unique distinction of being the only club to have had 3 home grounds host full England internationals. England beat Ireland 9-0 at the racecourse ground in 1895, beat Ireland again 2-1 at the baseball ground in 1911, and most recently, Pride Park hosted England's 4-0 win over Mexico in May 2001. Pride Park was renamed the IPRA Stadium on 7 December 2013 as part of a 10-year, £7 million sponsorship deal with global sports drink company IPRA.